Yeah, you found it?
No, I'm trying to.
Can you
Yeah, I
say
found it.
this?
I got it.
Blah, blah, blah.
So welcome, everybody. We will begin in momentarily. A very warm welcome to everybody joining us online. We are live.
Was it live? It's on.
Good evening, everyone. A very warm welcome to you. My name is Sana Kapoor. I have the privilege of serving as OEB Director of Advancement Communications and External Relations. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome today's panelists that are esteemed authors. Before we begin, I wish to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. Now, without further ado, I would like to request our esteemed authors to please come up and do the introductions, and I can't wait to get my copy signed later. There will be opportunities for conversations and food and networking after we hear more about the book. Over to you.
Thank you. There you go. You're right.
Thank you everyone for being here today. I'm Zuhra Abawi. I'm an assistant professor at Niagara University Ontario, and my colleagues will come and introduce themselves as well. Arved and Dr. ABC, Andrew. I'm going to talk a little bit about the process of putting this book together, which we have described all three of us as a labor of love. The book came together sort of from conversations that we've had over time, a lot of time actually, especially since COVID, about some of the challenges that we were experiencing teaching in teacher education programs. A lot of these challenges also came to light with ministry reviews, the most recent being the 2020 review of the Peel District School Board. And we started talking about some of these patterns that have been recurring and some of the gaps about concerning why these, harmful practices continue to perpetuate themselves. And coming from three very different institutions, we, started informally looking at these converging and diverging themes from our own programs and our own departments, and there's significant overlap. Overlap in terms of who is admitted into teacher education programs, what the criteria is for admission to teacher education programs, and where do these sort of, these narratives of what makes an ideal teacher, where do they come from? And how are they perpetuated through sort of settler colonial norms of what a good teacher is? So we started mapping together what our book might look like, focusing first on what teacher identity is. And we sort of were looking at the trajectory of missionary work going forward into civilizing missions, and how many of the educators in residential schools were in fact white women, and overwhelmingly white women make up the teaching demographic in Ontario and Canada. We sort of started putting together our ideas, and we came up with our proposal and blasted it out with Canadian scholars who were wonderful. And we actually got a lot of interest, and we couldn't take everyone's submission. We thought about doing part two because there was so much interest and there was so much interesting content. And we wanted to make sure that we were also not just representing Ontario, but also looking at the whole Canadian context. And so we did see the same sort of themes that we had talked about happening across Canada, and also not just who's being admitted, but the pushback that a lot of racialized faculty encounter when they're teaching teacher candidates, especially when it comes to, quote unquote controversial topics. And much of the time, unfortunately, racialized faculty are not tenured or tenure track. So there's a lot of pushback and a lot of fear and a lot of silencing. And so this collection was sort of a way for people to bring their voices forward and talk about some of the challenges and the ways that the strategies and navigation through these difficult times. And so our labor of love is finally in your hands, and I'm going to pass it over to Artaban. But each of the chapters, I think, was very intentional. We were very intentional in the chapters that we selected. We wanted to make sure that we had voices represented from different communities and different regions of Canada. We wanted to make sure that the text was representative of diverse voices from faculty who are engaging in this difficult work, often, with a lot of consequences of being silenced or shut down or pushed back. So that's why we refer to it as a labor of love. So I will bring Artaban up.
Andrew's gonna.
Andrew, sorry, next to Miss Medley's next.
Thank you so much. No, I'm not necessarily at any event. That's just being a regular day. Just want to inform everyone that there's books at the back to be purchased afterward. We have a lot of conversation. We're not going to spend the entire time sitting like this. We want to network, we want to talk, want to encourage each other. I really feel to talk with you just a minute ago. I want to multiply that with other person. That was such good us. Got two good us and got some real connections. That is important. When we get to connect with people, we're talking about anti-racist pedagogy. We're talking about the real, genuine, honest stuff, not the performative stuff. And that is what the real stuff is about. So there's going to be books to purchase, there's going to be food afterwards. I see there are free bags at the back as well. Oh yes, there's freeness. I love it. And absolutely beautiful. So let's start. I want to share a few things. The first thing I want to share is, you were talking about the labor of love. And something I want to add to that before I get into my little conversation here is the power of collegiality. When you're trying to get into academia, I speak very, very plain like this. I want people to learn from what I share. Trying to get into academia, we see how easily it gets very competitive. Very competitive. For this present job that I have, I remember when I was shortlisted with people that I respect and love. We have never had this conversation about the tension that I felt when we were shortlisted with people we respect and love. But Artaban was one of the persons, and we had a beautiful conversation about our friendship, what we have had, and our love for each other and our care, and the blessing that we gave each other, whoever got the job. But those conversations, they don't happen a lot in academia. You have to choose a side. And I want to talk about a little bit about the collegiality I find in working with Artaban and Zuhra. This is my third book with Artaban and my second with Zuhra. And we're going on to a third. And it's because we are comfortable and respectful and appreciative of each other. We're not taught how to fan the flames of each other. We're taught how to compete. That's how academia is. It's capitalism. If you get the most publishing, then you get the prize. Yay! And one person alone could win. Wish we could be like Oprah. You get a car, you get a car, you get a car, you get a car. What about that? But the truth is, we have to find ways in which we all can be a part of a community. And for me, I'm very, very genuine and very, very honest about that. Today I had lunch with a staff member here, and we had a great lunch, and she said to me, "You seem really happy." She said to me, "Are you happy?" That was a powerful question. And I said to her, "I am." When she said, "I'm happy with my job here at Odyssey and the team," and I said, "I am." I said, "I am blessed to have people I work with that I actually like." Well, I'm going to say the things I need to say. And that's power. That's what gives me joy. That's why I can get up every morning and get ready for work. And I'm very protective of that. So I want to encourage us as we talk about anti-racist pedagogy. It's more than the book. It's about the living. It's a conversation you and I just had about students who feel a sense of belonging in your classroom. That is what anti-racist pedagogy is about. That is what liberation pedagogy is about. It's about how in your class, when you spend that 3 hours, the students want to show up. They want to show up in your class. They want to show up not just physically, but they want to show up as their full self, their whole self. They want to write into the reflection and tell you who they are. And they see you after class and say, Dr. Campbell, make sure you read my reflection number 2. And you go up, I mean, it's a lot of reflection. But because they say that to you, you go and you click on it and you read it. And when you think you're tired and exhausted, you just get a shot of just vitamin, because when you read it, you realize the only way they shared that with you was because they trust you. Because in that lecture, in that class, they found a space of liberation. Your class is truly a reflection of what you are writing. And I've said it many times, people have heard me say it. I said, I try my best. I don't want to get up one day and be a hypocrite. What do you mean by that? Because you write about anti-racist pedagogy, you write about belonging, you write about inclusion, you write about Indigenous students, you write about the things that you write all these things. But when we see you outside of the writing, you are somebody else. And so I hold myself accountable. And I want us all to hold ourselves accountable. That was my introduction. I want to pick up all the persons who are online, all the other authors online. I see you, well, I don't see you, but I know you're online because I sent you the link. So you're online. I want to also build up the group of students from University of Alberta. A professor there who said all our students, and I saw the message, I was like, this work is done. You bring your students, you bring your class to the place, and I want to big up the persons who are here. I see the support. When we talk about that, I see the support, the people that love and care for me. They are in the building, they are here. When you walk in, I got the hug. That is important. These are the things we're not talking about. And yes, we want to talk about anti-racist pedagogy and pedagogy of hope and pedagogy of love. Well, you have to practice it, you have to live it. So let me tell you what I'm doing in another couple minutes. So I want to read a line from the foreword that has come from Professor Ann Lopez. Thank you, Professor Ann Lopez, who did our foreword. And she said in the foreword, the goal of this book is to focus on ways in which anti-racist and activist pedagogy can be enacted in teacher education. What does that look like? I always say to people, there are many ways to disrupt racism, many ways to disrupt homophobia, Islamophobia, many ways to disrupt hate. And sometimes we think the way I'm going to disrupt it is I'm going to be an anti-racist professor. What does that look like? Like if they ask me, Dr. Campbell, who is an anti-racist professor, I'm going to have to think about it because it's more than you're teaching. Because let's say for this semester, I'm teaching 3 courses. What, I'm going to be anti-racist 3 times for the week? What am I the other times of the week? Pretentious, hypocritical, checkboxing, and who are you? And so for me, one of the biggest things that I love about this work was the ways in which we talk to each other. We had some great conversation about ourselves. Who are you as an anti-racist professor? Who are you saying you're doing anti-racism work? Who are you? It's about the care that you bring to the space. And I want to encourage everyone that anti-racist work for me is about love and care and kindness and creating space and joy. Real joy. Not the pretend joy like, yes, let's take a picture, let's smile, because I'm good with social media. I know what a good smile looks like. But do I have that smile afterward? I do. I do when I think about the people I'm connected with. So I leave you with this. Last year in this Master of Teaching, I work at, I didn't introduce myself. So my name is Dr. Andrew Campbell, aka Dr. ABC, and I'm the Assistant Professor of Racial Justice in Teacher Education. A fabulous title. People meet me like in the subway or somewhere, they said, what is a professor, a teacher's dream of anti-racist pedagogy? And then I get into it. Because I think I was going to give them some framework. I get to it how I bring myself to school and how I create space for myself and create space for others. Or I've learned how to show up as a Black man in a predominantly white institution. Or I've learned how to go to tables and speak up, even when my voice cracked. And just so you know, my voice has broken many times in this building already. It has. For the first time this year, for the first time, I read a lot about white silence. Do you know what that looked like? Because I've never experienced that. See it in books, that I could tell you, because it's in books. I experienced that this year. And when I experienced it, I literally walk out and I go, what doctor? I'm not going to trust no one. To share from the depths of your heart, what you're feeling, what you're going through, what's happening with the program you're working with, and not one person saying anything. So here's what I'm going to say to you, part of anti-racist pedagogies. I'm going to encourage all of us, do not miss any opportunity to be anti-racist, to be that person. If you know what is killing many of us, the missed opportunities, not the big opportunities. The missed opportunity. People see me all the time and they see me on stage with a mic and they want some of that. Oh no, I've met people. They want some of that. How do you get to be a keynote so often? Let me know some of that. They want some of that. It feels good. But what they don't want to know is about the missed opportunities. And I say to them, you see an opportunity, but how many missed opportunities you and I have had to truly speak up when we should? I've learned something. Anti-racist pedagogy takes brave and bold and moral courage. And you have to be honest. And you cannot sell out that honesty trying to navigate institutions. I know there's a workshop somewhere right now teaching all of you how to navigate institutions. And halfway through that workshop, you realize, a part of this navigation is really losing who I am. It's a decision you have to make. And so this year in the master teaching program where I teach, I'm the teacher and learning coordinator as well. And so I run the teaching and learning series for the professor, for the instructors of our teaching faculty. Last year we looked at racial justice. This year we're looking at position, practices, and pedagogies when it comes to anything to do with anti-oppressive practices. What are those practices that talk about our pedagogy, our teaching, our practices, how we arrive to school, how we engage with our students, and our position, who are we? And so when you read the book, I want to encourage you to look at the chapters and notice, for instance, in chapter 4 on page 65, also on page 196, how people, these are two of my favorite, page 65, page 196, how people describe their positionality, the vantage point in which you get to see, and understand that your position is different from mine. Understand that you don't come in the body of a Black woman. And so when a Black woman says certain things about a Black woman from her experience, she's saying that when I say my experience from a Black gay immigrant man, you don't have my experience unless you're a Black gay immigrant, and you don't have my experience. And so how do we understand things from that vantage point? And I want us to think about that. And the last thing I say is intentionality. Page 1 of this book, page 1, our chapter. We talk about intentionality. And I leave you with these 3 things. Intentionality, when you do this work, think about self-examination. Think about yourself. Oh, am I doing this work right? I check myself. I don't know why we're not checking ourselves. I check myself. Did I say the right things? Did I encourage a student enough? Did I say those things that I know I should have said? Did I water it down? Did what? I check myself. And in checking yourself, you check your privilege. A lot of people are shocked when I use the word privilege, because they think somehow we're going to talk about white privilege. If you sit and listen long enough, you realize we talk about privilege at all levels. I walk in privilege of title. I know what it looks like to go into somewhere and introduce myself as doctor. I know what it feels like. And I see the difference in the room. Come on now. When I say come on, that's a little piece of Pentecostal preacher inside. That's a whole different story. I talked about another time. And then the accountability of self, holding ourselves accountable. And the last thing I say is the moral courage This work, I've always said, you can listen to me on 10,000 videos, but I said it. This kind of work is heavy lifting. A lot of people want to do this kind of work because they want a badge or a stick and a star. We love a stick and a star. Even adults I'm talking, not talking about kids, talking about you like a stick and a star. And a stick and a star is cute. I like a stick and a star. When they took my name off the door the other day, I came to my office there when my name wasn't on the door. I was like, where's my different tag? I said, oh, we're fixing them up. I said, okay, back. Like a stick and a star. But there's more to us, and there should be more to us than a stick and a star. It's supposed to be authentic. This is heavy lifting. Not every day you're gonna feel fabulous. Oh yes, I know what fabulous is. I feel fabulous. But not every day I feel fabulous. There are days I'm tired. There are days I'm nervous. There are days I'm worried. But all of that's a part of this work. All right, I'll come back with some in the Q&A section to talk some more and some over to you, Professor Arvan. Did you like to get Arvan?
I went last, and you can get out of time today.
I love you.
I also put on the button up today because I know how Andrew dresses. Stuff like that. No, I want to start. My name is Arvan Zadra. My pronouns are he and his. I want to start by really saying thank you to all of you on this beautiful day, taking time out of your busy schedule to be here. So, and the people joining us online. So, give yourself a round of applause. I'm gonna come at it a little bit different, but I'm always a little bit extra. But I don't have his energy level, but I'm gonna try to deliver some points. I will read out some sections and just emphasize a couple of things. I got a love-hate relationship with higher ed and academia. That's the reality of my life. I'm always reflecting on this question of when did we become our titles? And if you're around me, a lot of times, even my students, they'll be like, what do we call you? Doctors, people always question my name, but that's not good. But I say just call me artifact because I think, and as we grow and read each other, I feel like why do we always say like I'm artifact and I'm affiliated with this? Like, you know, like your institution is the most important thing about, which is not. But that's what become normalized about us. Or like, you know, I'm a PhD student here, right? And so I think nobody's gonna remember your titles, but they're just gonna remember who you are and how you treat them. So it doesn't matter if it's an elementary student I'm talking to or a graduate student or colleagues. I have a rule that says I don't write with anyone I can't have at my house and have a drink and food with. So, and I live by that rule, believe it or not. I know I say that as a joke, but we have a lot of meals, a lot of conversations. You know, a lot of you here are amazing friends who are part of our circles. I've either collaborated with you on a project or as colleagues and friends. We start out as colleagues, but we become more than that. So I would encourage you, that is really doing equity work. It's to invest in the relationship. Yes, it might start as a quote unquote professional relationship, but how are you bettering each other? And I think that's what you want to look for in every relationship, is pushing each other to be better. It doesn't mean me and Andrew and Zuhra are always going to agree, but we should have that conversation. And I think I'll go a little bit deeper into that when I read some segments. But I guess my roles, I'm an assistant professor, if you want to know, at Niagara University. But being in academia, I think critiquing is easy, and a lot of times I see folks invest only their time in critiquing, and we need to push each other to work with community more, to do the lifting that's needed at the grassroots level. So with that, I went back and into community after just being in academia for a few years. I feel like my soul was being yes, it was not feeling good. So I'm also the executive director of a nonprofit in the Gin and Pitch community, Youth Association for Academics, Athletics, and Director Education. Shout out if I know some of them are online watching. And so I think it puts me in a good position to be able to do the community work, but also write about it and make some of those synergies where I think the most impact can happen, whether that's community agencies, working with schools, working with higher ed. I guess a couple of backstories. I really need to thank some people. I want to thank Canadian Scholars Press. They're in the back. If you could give a round of applause. I work with 4 publishers now, and they're really amazing, very supportive. One example to give you would be a lot of times when we do a co-edited book, we get offered kind of like a standardized book cover to go with. And we approached Canadian Scholars Press and said we wanted to work with an artist. I had met a student, Zuhra Abawi, who did a PhD here when I was teaching at OIC as a sessional instructor. And, you know, he did some amazing work as a Palestinian artist. And I said, would you be interested in doing a book cover for us? And you know, she sent us some really great ones. We had some really good discussions. We actually had a line of red going through it. But it was decided it might be a little too gory. So we removed the red, but I mean, that's the reality of when we're talking about these issues. Like, it's not just stuff we're reading in the pages. Like, we're talking about genocide, we're talking about people being killed, we're talking about intergenerational trauma. So like, we gotta remember that, like, we write about it, and a lot of us live it in our intersectional identity, but not everybody made it here. And I'm glad to be in my 30s and still living. So having said that, I'll start with some acknowledgements, which also talk about kind of what the book represents or how we conceptualize it. And then I'm just gonna read a couple sections and emphasize things, and then go to the Q&A. And then I'll come back to read a poem at the end, because every time I try to end a book I'm in with a poem, because I want to disrupt the normalized way publishing works, because there's a lot of mafias in publishing. All right, so having said that, this was my acknowledgement, which I want to read out loud. It says, to be an activist is to stand up for what you believe in, to strategically take actions despite fears, and not sell your soul or compromise your values for more power, privilege, or profit. And the higher you go up, those decisions are going to be tougher. I dedicate this book to all the activists around the world who, through their transformative and revolutionary love, bravery, and resistance, take action against exploitative powers and systems that make this world a better place. And those exploitative places include higher educational institutions. This is for the revolutionary spirit and voice of hope passed down by our ancestors and their sacrifices. Dedicated also to the people of Iran who continue to fight oppressive regimes of power with the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom" in honor of Mahsa Amini. We must continue to heal hope, challenge the status quo, mobilize, and take intentional action to honor the sacrifice of our ancestors and previous generations who fought before us just to be here. I also dedicate this book to my support network, who contribute to sustaining and inspiring me to be more and continue to grow in new ways. My grandmother, rest in peace, not here, but definitely drives me to do a lot of this work. My grandfather, Nusratullah, my mother, Parvana, my father, Kamal, my brother, Arsalan, my sister-in-law, Barnice, my wife, Sierra, my mentor, Devon Jones, who's the founder of YACE, and he turned 50 years old today, and I was with him this morning. And the communities of Jane and Finch in Scarborough, where a lot of my growing up and community work has happened. And lastly, I dedicate the book to all the homies, all the hustlers, all the grinders who continue to do their best to survive and thrive and support their families, despite being in vulnerable circumstances and exposed to a lot of risk factors. Okay, now I'm going to read you a couple of sections, just really quickly. All right. And then I'll add some commentary in between. So I'm just reading from chapter 5, a small paragraph that says, this book is about recognizing that we can't allow difference and being different to be weaponized by colonial logic and white supremacy to further advance harm, violence, and oppression in our communities. The book is further about having difficult conversation about topics that may make people uncomfortable. We're striving for a brave space that allows multiple perspectives and lived experience to interact with each other with the objective of advancing equitable outcomes to the work of social justice. Most importantly, the objective is for you as the reader to commit to action, to become a lifelong activist and advocate where through your voice, decisions, and interactions, you challenge injustice when you see fit or where you can, particularly in teacher education, where students are impacted by a range of social issues based on who they are, where they are, where they live and their circumstances. And I think, you know, when you do a book, it's like, you gotta be 1 year ahead, right? So think about, we covered this title a year ago, and I think reflecting, I would say we're at a much more divisive stage politically right now, literally politically and within our institutions, right? I'm thinking about, you know, our Indigenous learners, you know, people belonging to the Two-Spirit LGBTQ plus. So folks feel unsafe, including in our schools. And so what can we do to support them to amplify their concerns? And it's a bit of irony to it, because when I use the term, and that's what the first chapter talks about, the weaponization of social justice, is how institutions and people selectively use when social justice is okay, right? So, you know, or people might say, you know, social justice is brainwashing folks, you know, we don't want that in the States. We can think of, you know, banning of critical race theory, or, you know, the admission requirements, Supreme Court decision, right? Which kind of was a step back with affirmative action. But then they would take their own stance, which is very specific, and say, well, it's freedom of speech, right? Same situation, their interpretation of it makes a difference. And anytime we get into argument as A or B, it's counterproductive to social justice, because we need to talk about what happens when we go from A to B, and all the complexities and the nuances involved. Did I talk as long as you did?
Yes.
No, I don't want to mention. Because you're pregnant. I'm taking it. Okay, let's leave off with maybe this section here. We have to become conscious of how various processes in place do not allow for authentic voices of identities and communities impacted by an issue to be heard and listened to. As an example, if you work in a position where the title is like Indigenous learners or Black student support, I think you should belong to that identity group supporting them, okay? Or else it's a bit of an irony, kind of like Andrew's point, you're kind of speaking on behalf of others. If none exist, email me, I will connect you with people with lived experiences in it, or email Andrew or Zuhra or others who can help facilitate that. I'll quote Sarah on it because I do like her work a lot, who says in the book, one of her latest book, Complaint, to be heard as complaining is not to be heard. Right? Let me read that again. To be heard as complaining is not to be heard. I know I really gotta rate Sarah on it because she had a 10-year job and left that job because the university did not support a group of students who came forward declaring how they were harassed. And the whole book is how complaint processes within higher ed or schools or institutions protect the institution more than the complainant. And so that book really challenged me to think about how do we do equity work, and how equity work sometimes ends up being repackaged as protecting the institution rather than challenging the status quo of how things can be different to actually meet the needs of the communities the institution is supposed to serve. We learn how only some ideas are heard if they need to come from the right people. Right can be white. This is also auditory theory. All right. And I'll end off by saying values of profit are making many institutions and corporations compromise when it comes to their stance on social issues and social justice due to it being labeled as political work. I mean, when it's sexy, everyone wants to do it, right? But when it's hard, that's when you gotta do it. When somebody hits rock bottom, that's where you need to be there. It's easy to be here for me or for Angie or Zuhra, now that we're in tenure track position, but I'm gonna remember the people when I was struggling were there for me, right? So remember that and how you can do that for others to pay it forward. On the contrary, some institutions and corporations are committing the superficial expression or stance against social injustice to maintain a positive public image due to consumer concerns. The truth is that all work is political, whether we like it or not, right? One more time, the truth is all work is political, whether we like it or not. Yet the political rhetoric of being neutral and not ruffling the feathers has worked effectively to create a system where silence is promoted and reinforced instead of uncomfortable conversations. And I would say, you know, the way we do it now is we're not gonna say like, we're gonna come and colonize you. We say you should be professional, right? So when somebody asks you that next time, I want you to ask them, what do you mean you told me be professional? Is it like the way I talk? Is it the way I dress? Right? And tell them how that relates to my duties and responsibilities as a teacher. And I think a lot of times we fear going against the norm, and it's rightfully so, but while doing anti-racist activist work, find community. Because when you have community, you strategize. And this, we don't talk enough about the strategizing piece in this work, right? Because there is no myth of one solution, right? You gotta go to the protest, go to the protest.
Yeah.
I'm not a big protest guy. Mine is the writing piece. I see my writing as my activism and investing in community through programs. But it's not to say one is better than the other. We need everybody to do the different things wherever you're planted, wherever you are and the communities you are in. And the more we can do that, hopefully we can get to the point where the institutions now say, you know what, let's pause, maybe we got it wrong. And is there a way to do it with community, with people with lived experience, who can help us actually address the need. And I'll leave you by thinking about this word that I've been thinking about a lot. And the word is systemic and institutional neglect. And I think I'm like really in my mind playing around, what does neglect mean? I know like we talk about a lot when like a parent neglects the child's needs, but I think we don't talk a lot how institutions neglect the needs of the people they're supposed to serve. And a follow-up question I have is, then in that neglect, where does the gatekeeping happen? And if we can identify in the process from no neglect to institutional apathy and neglect, where does those things happen that lead to that outcome, then we can challenge it. And once again, there's no one entry point to the solution. There'll be different places. So I'll leave it with that. I know we want to go to Q&A and we'll come back. So thank you.
All right, I'm gonna go to Q&A. Sam?
I did take longer than actually for the record.
Thank you for that. If anyone has questions, we have a person like to hear.
Before we ask a question, it's important we do these things, we have to acknowledge in other spaces we understand what it is. Many people always ask about, oh, is this new dean? For those who don't know, or is the new dean sitting right among us? And so we want to say, pleasant good afternoon to you, you are. And we get to us, yeah. We're taking you, always looking for a big up and respect my team. Go ahead,
Thank you very much, Dr. Kimball. I'm so pleased to be here on Friday. We played in graduation from the book, and I hope to chat with some of you around goes on. I don't want to interrupt anymore.
Thank you, Gina. As we said, we're gonna have good time for conversation. We want to really connect with each other. So I think it's gonna be about 20 minutes of question max. And then we have food and conversations and yeah, live our best life. Go ahead.
I don't really have a question. I'm a PhD student, and my mind is long. I'm not even in higher education. It's education, community development, so the community development piece.
Yes.
I'm not even thinking of going into academia. I'm thinking of going into community and maybe teaching, like one week's, session in the evening or something like that. But I'm really encouraged to see how collaboration works, because for me, I'm like, oh, I want to do it on my own. You go into a class, oh, you can do it on your own or work with somebody. And I was just wondering, I guess I do have a question. I thought, how have you ever been where you just want to do the work yourself, and then if so, how do you pass that to collaborate? Because this to me is, how can we push past that thought of just on my own? So I just want to say thank you, and also what was the experience like for you pushing past that?
I'll start by answering. That's an excellent question. I think as Andrew mentioned, we're taught in these sorts of spaces to mistrust one another and to sort of, look over our shoulder and see what the other person's doing. And I remember someone telling me my first year when I was doing my doctorate here at Boise that, don't tell anyone what you're doing your research on, because they might take your idea. And it's just like, okay. And then you're sort of like, okay, well, how do I know, if this idea is a good idea, and how do I get other people's thoughts on it when it's just me and sort of, I'm sitting there with these thoughts and I can only speak to my supervisor about it. So when you have that mindset, you can't grow and you can't make those connections, and it becomes a very lonely and isolating journey. I think most of us have at some point tried to push through and do this work by ourselves, but learning to get past that sort of colonial mentality that you're in competition with everyone and everyone wants to see you fall down and take your spot. It's very harmful, and it requires a lot of unlearning. And so once you get past that, you learn to, look at your colleagues as friends and not as competition. And we're already talking about, other projects we want to take on and do together. And you're always going to have strength in numbers. So I don't know if anyone wants to.
I'll just jump in there quickly to say, it's good with others. Absolutely. I can literally sit you down and show you a list of things I've learned from these two persons. I remember when I and Steve Sider from Wilford.
Yeah, that's my institution. Come on.
Yes.
We were building up your team. I want that.
We were doing counter narratives. I remember how much I just learned from Steve and Arva about counter narratives, understanding what is a counter narrative, the power of a counter narrative. I remember that learning process. And so doing it with others is so important. You lean on each other, and you also lean on each other's strength, because we know the strength of each other right here and what people are good at. And you allow people to do that. But also, the last thing I'll say, it encourages you as a human being. It encourages you as a person. It feels good to be a part of something, a part of a group, we all want to be wanted. We all want to be needed. We all want to be included. That's just the truth. And so it feels good. And it's something that we don't talk about as much, as I said, because we live in a very competitive place and space, but it feels good to be a part. And I see other persons there who have worked with other projects and how people are inviting you into a space. It feels good. So I encourage you, as you go along in community work as well, make sure you build that community, build that space, build a space that people can come and be a part of something, because we need more of that. That's what I would say about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I would just add, you're never alone. You have ChatGPT. But on a serious note, I think it's okay to go and talk to people that you want to work with. Like, worst case, they're gonna tell you no, or they're too busy. You know what I mean? And then you say, okay, well, no, you're not gonna be busy and I wanna come back. But I'll give you an example. Like, Zach is here from the Robertson Math Program at University of Toronto. One day I got this email that said, donate to the program. It was a donor email. I was like, this looks like an amazing program. We're doing some math stuff in Jane Finch community with Yace. I sent him an email. I said, I would love to connect with you, learn about the program. I think Jane Finch community can use such program. And then it was a conversation. And it was like, hey, our kids don't really learn online, and your program is online. Can we bring it to in person, right? And then we ended up writing a shirt, partnership engagement grant, just got funded to pilot teaching math through basketball. If there's like, go for your ideas and think outside the box, right? And I think the last point I make is like he gave the example, we went for, I think we went to like 3 job talks that were shortlisted, and we were just like, listen, man, this OIG job is better be you or me, or it's gonna be a problem. I mean, he got the job. I'm happy that he got the job, because that's love right there, knowing somebody who's gonna come there and have the competency. And so I think we have to ask ourselves, like, how do we, push others, to also come back when they get no or whatever like that, right? Like, he actually got declined at Laurier when I was there, and I was like, hey, man, I know Steve was on that hiring committee, I didn't give you the job, but we need to do this work together, you got that life. And then he said, yeah.
Yeah.
But he could have been bitter, you know what I'm saying? That's the point I'm making, like, we gotta humble ourselves sometimes too. Just because someone tells us no, it doesn't mean it was our shortcoming. But sometimes maybe it was an institutional shortcoming or lack of vision, or wasn't just the right fit.
Yeah.
But sometimes we take it to heart and put it all on us. So you just gotta take your wins, process your losses, and keep strategizing.
More questions?
I want that. I just really appreciate your energy and how you're able to work together, and as a high school teacher, both as a colleague and as a classroom teacher, I look at you creating an energy where you're anti-racist and how you can work together. But there's a common ground, like there's a humility, I think.
Yeah.
There's a willingness to look at yourself and to listen, a maturity. How do you translate that to high school students? But what are you doing with pre-service educators that are still predominantly white?
Yeah.
To create those conversations, because they're bringing them into the schools, and those are the staff rooms, that's what it looks like. So that's my roundabout question.
Camilo? Okay, I thought I'd keep it short so you get some time. I mean, that's a good question. I think, I'll just go and give some practical things, because, all of us teach in a teacher education program, and I think the demographics at each institution is different. So I think, for me, what I try to do is, I try to move away from grades, because unfortunately we're fixated with grades. So I say, I spend a lot of time relationship building. Every first 15 of my class, we sit in a circle and we're doing almost like an icebreaker, an energizer, sometimes a thinking game, which I started infusing a little bit. Like, I know we talk a lot about this, like this space has to be prepared if we're gonna start talking about white supremacy. We gotta say, okay, week one, you know, read the invisible knapsack and now let's dissect it, all right? So we gotta build them up to be ready to have that constructive, critical thinking. And I would say a lot of people take it defensive if some student comes with a racist ideology. What we have to ask ourselves is, why does that student think that way? At what point in their life they became indoctrinated to think that way? And I have to try to disrupt that process during the 12 weeks I have with them, right? So shaming or calling them out, I think, is important if harm is being done. But we also have to grab them and have them at the table, because if the conversation once again becomes I'm right and you're wrong, that person can't become an ally and will never understand. And it's a tricky dance. It's gonna be ugly sometimes. Sometimes maybe there's a bit of shouting, but that's okay. Real learning is messy. And I think I try to bring community.
Yeah.
I try to bring community into the classroom, right? People with lived experiences. And I try to tell them, you all have students, even if it's high school, that you all have knowledge, your emotions are data, your lived experiences. So learning to tell your story and how you tell it and where you tell it is just as important as what I want you to remember after these 12 weeks together.
Yeah, I think relationship building is already been mentioned, but I have to say, to be honest with you, it does get exhausting sometimes, especially when you're sort of, you become a broken record about the same thing, and you're sort of, you know, you're trying to make, well, you're trying to teach how you're teaching and being disruptive to the status quo, and you get pushed back, and of course, it does take a toll and it is exhausting. And I think that's why it's really important to have colleagues and friends like Artem and Andrew, so that you can lean on each other and get strategies, and again, not be alone in these situations, and lean on different resources and get different perspectives, because there are times that you're human and you're just frustrated because you're having the same conversations and nothing's getting through, and you're getting pushed back, and people in your class don't feel safe to speak about their lived experiences, and that's always a problem.
I would say, something you said, Arvan, is very important about preparing the ground.
You know, for me, I say to my students here, or the teacher candidates, I said, you're gonna be a teacher for all students. And my job is to prepare you to teach all students. And I said, the chances of my nephews and nieces and children, if I have any, having a white teacher in Toronto, is gonna be great. I want to prepare you to teach all children, all students. And so for me, I always say to them, you know, we're talking about AI and the magic stuff, that's fine. But I said, that for me, I'm still old strong. The single most important ingredient in the teaching and learning process is a teacher. It's how you allow. I always say, when students come to school, they come to school to you. They come to school to you, the teachers. I said, how do you prepare yourself? So for instance, last week, we had the conversations out in Twist LGBT conversations, shouting and all the kind of stuff that happened, Queen's Park and everything. And we came back to OISE. And my course, which is the anti-discrimination course, we hosted a joint lecture on Twist LGBTQIA plus issues in education. And I said to them, these are tensions you have to deal with. We're here having a lecture about Twist LGBTQIA+. School boards are out there at Queen's Park having the same discussion. So the idea that to feel like we're going to have classes where everything is going to be great and the answers are going to be great, no. I said, you're going to leave my class sometime with more questions than answers. It's how it's supposed to be. So we talk about the tensions. So my advice to you is when you're teaching high school students about this conversation, say to them, these are brave conversations. These are courageous conversations. They are going to be some uncomfortable conversations. The idea I see everybody's using, and I think it's great. I know social work people like it, where you come to these great conversations and you say to people, if you feel uncomfortable, you should step out, all that kind of stuff. I get it. But I say to people, when students ask me, oh, Dr. Campbell, should have given me a trigger warning? I am very strong. I said, there are no trigger warnings in life, in many instances. I said, the many times I was called a batty boy or a father, I did not get a trigger warning. So me coming to OISE give you a trigger warning for every lecture is pretentious. And students who are upset with me for that. And they go to my boss, who's over there, Leslie, who's amazing. Professor Leslie Rosa, they go to the dean, which is busy, but they go to her still. And I say the truth is, when you finish complaining, I'm going to be right here, because the truth is, there are, and I could give you 50 stories where there were no trigger warnings. So the idea that I'm going to have to give you a trigger warning every time is pretentious. It's pretentious. So I want to model what happens in the real school. And I think what we come with is that we come with real teaching experience. While teaching at OISE in leadership, I'm teaching kindergarten and grade 1. Oh yeah. So I know what's happening in school. I'm not unaware what's happening in schools. And so I bring that knowledge. So I would say, make sure you, as you said, prepare them for the conversation. And it takes time. It takes time. You don't go in full force. You prepare them for the conversation. These conversations we're going to have, they are going to be brave, they are going to be courageous. Sometimes you're going to feel uncomfortable. It's okay. It's okay not to have the answer. It's okay to feel like you're not doing as great as you should. Those things are important. Those conversations are important to have with our students. And the last thing I'll say, I do a talk with schools and with parents. Do a talk that says equity begins at home. And so I say to the parents, don't wait for school. Equity begins at home. And I teach them little things. I said, tell me when you see a TV and a black man comes on the TV, somebody in a wheelchair comes on the TV, an old person comes on the TV. What are the conversations like? When you go to the museum, when you go to the fair, you see something that you never eat before. What are the conversations? Is it yucky? Is that the best word you can find? Yucky? That you have never tasted it before? It's new? Is it weird? Are those the vocabulary using in grade 1? Weird and yucky. How do we disrupt weird and yucky? How does it become different? It's not weird or yucky, it's different. So those are the kind of conversations we have to have with our students. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those comments. My name is Mary, and I the teacher at Sanitarium. This would have been my 17th year in different capacities. Serving my latest role was with special education as a consultant, and now with the ministry, multiculturalism and
Citizenship.
My Canadian department, but just hearing you talk, and a lot of the times, the work is being done. I feel that, like, as I was visiting classrooms and supporting teachers, it's how do you teach people to love children that especially different from now. And just, like pedagogies are there's so many different things happening, but at the core of it, there's no love.
Let me jump first quickly. They give me permission. When I do workshops, many persons have been to my workshops. I will do something on purpose. So what I will do, I will have a slide and I will go, let's get into the equity stuff, and I put up the word that everybody wants to hear because you want to have your resume. So when you go for your promotion, you can use the word. So I put the decolonization, I put the equity, I put the inclusion, I put belonging, I put whatever framework. I quote everything because they want that, because you want your resume to look good so you can sell yourself, which is fine. And then after I finish with that slide, I go in, I can show them I have a good PhD from University of Toronto. They know that it's good, okay, and worth the money. And then I go to the next slide and I say, well, let's get to the deeper stuff. And my first word is empathy. My second word is care. My second word is love. My next word is kindness. And I said, these are the things that if you don't have these, the other slide, it makes no sense. I tell you a quick story. I was teaching a school at the LTO, a school at the intersection of Eglinton and Keele. And I went into that school, and predominantly Black and racialized kids. Staff at that time, 7 years ago, the staff at that time was predominantly white. I was teaching grade 1. A little girl passed by my class. First day of school. And she had this beautiful, beautiful long braids, little black girl. And I said to her, well, excuse me, who did your hair? And she looked at me, she said, my auntie or auntie. And I said, well, tell your auntie, Miss McCann, that you are fabulous. She looked at me and she ran off, dying with laughter. Next day, recess, she passed my class, 2 other girls. So I see 3 little black girls and I go, well, excuse me, little princess. I said, and she quicker said, who do your hair? Who did your hair? She said, my mother. The other one said, my mother, which is her and there 2 of them are. And they ran up and I said, well, you are fabulous. They ran off. Next day, they came back, the next day. Until I went outside and I said, what are you doing outside? Not realizing, now I'm going now to discipline them. Because they're outside doing the wrong, doing class time, not realizing they're coming back for more. They're coming back to hear they're beautiful. They're coming back to hear they're fabulous. They're coming back to hear love and kindness, which they do not hear. You know what I did at that school? Before I know what anti-racist pedagogy and all this fabulous stuff was, I went to the staff room. Now remember, don't forget I'm an LTO. I'm looking for a job next time. I need to be nice. I need to say the right word. I tell people what, I'm not new to this. I've always been this person. I went to the staff room and I raised my hand and wait for the part that said any other business, because that's when you get to talk. Okay. When you go tell me you want to say something, wait to the any other business, raise your hand. And I raised my hand at any other business and I said, I want to say something. I've been to the school for 2 weeks or 2 weeks. And I said, I realize the staff is 90% white, the students are 95% Black and racialized. I want us to practice and learn how to complement Black kids and racialized kids. The staff was quiet. I said, I want us to practice what beautiful looks like when it's not in a ponytail. I'm going to finish the story here. It went well. Because they realized I was very adamant about that, and it was a beautiful experience, but because they don't know, because it's not something that they do naturally. And so we have to inculcate those kind of conversations in our school. Belonging is more than just you tell me your letters and I say it. Belonging is more than pronoun. Belonging is more than a flag and a sticker. Belonging is real. How do I feel when I'm in your presence? More than a sticker and the t-shirt and the orange t-shirt. Nobody's wearing an orange t-shirt. We are done with orange t-shirt. That was last week Friday, was orange t-shirt day. Today is what day? I don't know, but we are done. How many of us are genuinely thinking about what about the children? it has to be authentic, it has to be authentic, and it has to translate in our work. So the love, the compassion, the friendship, the kindness, the hugs, seeing Leslie as somebody I work with, and I like to see her, and I want to see her, and I said good morning, I check on her, that's the real deal there. That's the real deal there. Seeing Professor Mary Reed right there, who I love, that's the real deal there. That's the real deal. If I'm crying out in a bad day, I can speak to Mary, I can speak to Ardivan. That's the real deal. Our students are lacking, and we're not telling them enough about love and care and respect for each other. We have to preach that some more. I said preach, look at that. Go ahead.
Never go in my hair is fabulous.
It's fine.
I mean, for me, I think teacher education can learn a lot from social work. I don't think they talk enough.
Yeah.
Like, I use the framework of risk factors and protective factors in all my classes. And I use this reading, which I think changed the way I teach. And it's like a little 3-pager reading when I used to teach in a child and youth care program. And it's this concept of first hour needs. And the reading says, if you spend the first hour of the day recognizing what are the unmet needs of your students, you won't spend the next 23 hours being reactive. And so the needs then goes into like some need touch, some need routine, some need acknowledgement, right? And then the question I ask to the teacher candidate is, how will you know your students' needs? And really, you have to build a relationship with them. And I think that part is somewhat like, that conversation is not new, but then I say, how much do you know about the community where your kids come from? And then the answer is most people don't, right? So when they go to practicum, I say, you gotta know what the systemic barriers impacting your school and where they're located. What's the poverty rate? What's the unemployment rate? How many single parent households? Because your students walk into your classroom with their lives, right? And if you don't understand how that impacts learning, then you're always being reactive, right? You gotta understand why that kid is sleeping. You gotta understand why that kid can't get a permission form signed because there's nobody's home or they're working night shift. And when you start connecting the dots, then teaching becomes easy, it becomes enjoyable. It's the art of teaching, right? If I got a shooting in the weekend, I can just come and say, open the book, we're going to page 10.
Yeah.
Like, I got a whole space, even if they don't want to talk about it, at least I provided the option. Or maybe it's not talking to me, maybe, hey, you know what, I can't relate to that issue, but here's a bunch of organizations we can call, here's a kids help phone line. So I think we don't do enough of that around understanding the neighborhood dynamics and the risk factors and the protective factors, because really teaching is a game of probabilities. Like life is a game of probabilities, but you gotta map out the risk factors, you gotta map out the protective factors. If the risk factors are more than the protective factors, your job as a teacher is decrease the risk factors, increase the protective factors. Then the rest is gonna be the neoliberalism of effort, how much help they get, and all of those pieces. Not to say they're not important, but we don't talk enough about those systemic pieces.
Just to end off, yeah, going back to when you brought up about social workers and social work, I think that's a really important point, because what I get a lot of in my classroom is, teach me how I can use this in my classroom, right? How can I, laminate this and make this look good, rather than, how am I going to deal with a child coming to me and confiding something to me, or, dealing with a child who is, going through hardship or turmoil, or a child that just came as a refugee, how do I deal? It's like they don't want that messiness. It's sort of just teach me how to package it and make it look pretty. And they don't think about how intentional you have to be when you become a teacher, and the different relationships and complexities that you have to navigate. It's sort of like, well, I'm going to become a teacher because, I get to stand at the front and, have some sort of authority and make things look nice. And they're not thinking about the social piece and the other factors, like we discussed, community, that they need to be informed about, and they need to be able to, build those relationships with the community so that there's trust.
I think we take one more, no, we're taking one more question and then we do the poem.
And then we have conversations and food and all that good stuff.
Thank you, Andrew. I assume that we're any other business right now.
Yeah.
I'm going to ponytail, so that's okay with you.
Fabulous.
So I'll situate myself. My name is Minnie Herbert. I'm an associate professor at York University, from the Allen as well.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, part of this narrative that's happening today is bringing up something extremely important, and that is the idea of lived experience.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, in the academy, that is not something that is factored in enough in hiring. And so what's being poured into teacher candidates is not about the reality of what they will face in the classroom. And we have to speak more about that. And part of the reason why that has not been, I think, addressed enough within institutions is because sometimes our communities are also not involved as they should.
Yeah.
And I want to take us back to the pipeline. When your child is in school, for those who have kids, for, you know, that first day, you get all the pictures now and Instagram and sometimes it's elaborate and it's like, oh my God, the first day and all this kind of stuff. Then they move on to high school and that dwindles a bit. And it's like, what is the teacher doing? Depending on where they're coming from, I'm from the Caribbean.
Yeah.
It may be like, you should be in school and listening to whatever they're telling you. But you don't know yourself what they're being told and what is resonating with your own child. And then they come to university and all of a sudden it's a whole step back.
Yeah.
And part of that is, unless you are including people who understand what is required so that it's practiced each and every time, then it becomes then what you're saying is, oh no, I can't receive that.
Yeah.
Because that's not what's expected, because that's not what they see in their own lives. And so we gotta go back to thinking about what is actually required out there, and then work back to then who do we hire and who do we invest in. And it can't always only then be around the teaching stream, but also it has to be in the research stream.
Yeah.
Or whatever you want to call the other stream, because I'm teaching stream too, so I say the other stream,
Yeah.
not to download anything else is happening. But we gotta figure out that all streams are as important as the other.
Yeah.
I've seen people do research on schools that have never stepped foot in schools. How? And those are the books that we read to then inform the practices in those schools. Before the gatekeepers
Yeah.
of the research that's coming into those schools. So as parents, as educators, as people who actually understand the strangeness of the academy,
Yeah.
we have to also speak up about that. I should be saying something about it, but this is not a question clearly.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Obviously first didn't read it, but I felt like compelled
Yeah.
to speak about this.
Yeah.
Because my background is as a teacher first. And so when students read me, it's unique.
Yeah.
And some of my colleagues are like, I don't like when they call me miss. I'm like, what is your problem? I'm like, that's just what they know.
Yeah.
And they don't know how to interact with you at this point in time. You may want to correct them. But I also say that when you're sitting on that subway, everybody know that you're not doing anything.
No, no.
You are just a regular person. And so I feel like we have to first start to be human again and think about who's in front of us,
Yeah.
because those are the life lessons that people take away. I got a text just today from a student that is not my student, not somebody else. They're acknowledging in their thesis because they felt that throughout their process, I was their mentor, not necessarily the extent of their supervisor.
Yeah.
So when you're sending students, it doesn't matter what they look like, into these academies, into programs, one of the things I tell students is it's not necessarily about, in some instances, the reputation of the institution, But can you get along with that person well enough that they pour into you and you learn from each other? Because that's what it's supposed to be about.
Yeah.
We don't hold all the knowledge.
No.
And I tell my students, I stand in front of you because I did it more than you, that's it. But one day you're gonna stand in front of me, you're gonna teach me as well. And I learn from each and every time. And so I feel like we're missing the core of what education or educating is about. And we have to get back to that. So I'll end there because that was any other business.
Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We're gonna ask one more final question, and then we're gonna do final question, or we have two final questions quickly. Two final questions, make them quick, and then Artaban is gonna close with an amazing point at the back, at the end, and then we're gonna have food and everything. But I wanna say something, you know, life is very full circle. And I know, definitely know she wasn't gonna say that. But I'm smiling nonstop because when he was my second professor, I never the he taught me method and taught me like a teacher, pulled me up like a teacher. So, yes, miss, thank you. Love you, Monique. Go ahead, please.
I thank you. I want to piggyback on that. The first thing I
Yes.
want to say is your humility and approachability is commendable. So thank you for that. Secondly, is just in hearing that, I'm a school principal in the Jane area, but I work with Mary in the anti-racism directorate this year. And my work is centered on humanizing and polarizing equity, centering the child. But the biggest barrier that I face is what I call, and I guess this is my contribution to the field, the educational ticks, the optics and the politics. And trying to do this work where educators are protected by unions, where the system is protecting themselves, you ostracize yourself, especially when you're a white man.
Yeah.
So my question for you, and just in reflection, is I had to go to academia to do this work because it wasn't welcomed by me in my system.
Yeah.
So I had conversations with scholars and they said, defend it in school. And that would be, as Dr. Artaban said, your contribution and your voice, because I don't have a voice in my system.
Yeah.
So my question for you is, how do you and how have you, through your lived experiences, navigated the optics and the politics where you are? Because in my school, I live by the mantra, connect before you correct. You do not send a student down when the student says they don't like you. You connect before you correct, but navigating those optics and politics has been very trying.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to ask you and leave that and then turn it over to the final question.
Thank you. Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard a similar question. About people being punished or, pushed back or suffering from, being pulled back in their careers because of wanting to actually do the work beyond optics and, the performative work. Unfortunately, that is one of the biggest impediments to, why we're seeing the violence perpetuated in our school systems that we continue to see perpetuated, because those that want to do the good work and put in that effort and build solidarity in communities are beaten down so much that they end up just leaving, or they just, they'll come to academia because they become just so disenfranchised in the school system. And it's unfortunate because it becomes a divide, and it becomes sort of, known among teachers that if you're not following suit and upholding the status quo, then you're a problem and you're a disruptor and you need to go. So it becomes isolating to do this work, and that's why it's not easy work. So I thank you for your question. And I have to say, just before I pass it on to Artaban or Andrew, it's not just limited to K-12, it happens in higher education as well. And as Dr. ABC mentioned at the beginning, that Boise, like many other institutions, are very white institutions. And actually coming back up here, because I was in the social justice education department, I noticed that there's some Indigenous artwork, which was really a nice surprise, because before it was just a bunch of old white guys on the wall. And so, that's a change that I'm glad to see, because this is social justice education. But it doesn't just, not limited to K-12. And even though those pictures might be up on the wall now, I know that faculty that are pushing and are resisting are still ostracized, whether it's in different academic positions and precarious positions, tenure versus tenure, all those different titles and complexities that are also navigated because of being a disruptor or resistor.
Let's take the last question and then we move on to the panel, because we want people to eat before you leave. If you want the conversation, go ahead.
Hi, everyone, Dr. Harrison. Yes, I just want to thank you for the book. I'm looking forward to reading it. I just wanted to extend the feedback for, because I teach currently in the high school system. And having conversations with, Black principals and VPs who I know around the city. I mean, for the longest while, I tried to get into the system and just to extend the point, when we have our pre-service teachers and, we arm them, we empower them with all these knowledge, but they're not being hired. We have a system in, at least in Ontario here, where it's very discouraging for Black bodies to be standing in those stations. Why? Because there's something wrong with inherently wrong with the hiring policy. And until we those matters are addressed, right? We here in academia and in society, in civil society, we're doing what we can in order to empower different teachers, regardless of whatever background they are, however, or identity. However, if they're not being hired, then that work is limited. So I'm just wondering if there's any thoughts. I know it's very difficult to navigate the hiring policy based on the little knowledge that I'm hearing.
Thank you so much.
First of all, this is about everything. I remember in 2010 where I worked in our BS program, so always good to see you. You know what, for me, my strategy has been a very simple one. Tackling, I think I'm also asking the last question, I'm going to do for one here.
Yeah.
I always ask the question of why. Like if you come to me and tell me like this is a policy, right? And I'm trying to make a point, like the strategical piece is we need to do more strategizing in community. So I'd be like, okay, here's a policy. Why can't we change it? Who is being excluded, right? And so if I can understand the person in a position of power, that the way that this works doesn't benefit, and it starts with a soft conversation, right? It's like it's a conversation at first. Then it's like, okay, now maybe it's an email and I see a couple of people higher than you to be aware of this conversation. Maybe it's not a phone call because I didn't want a paper trail, and now it's an email interaction. So if shit hits the fan, I'm not gonna be all right to have some proof, right? So like we gotta think more around the strategy piece, and then maybe it's like, oh, well, I'm gonna write an op-ed, and they'll be like, man, we'll listen to you if you just shut up, right? And I've been in those situations, right? So it all depends, and I want to make this point. You can't expect everybody to battle the same way, right? Like some people are not versatile. Like they only got one strategy. They're gonna be in your face all the time. That's it. And cool. I'm not judging if that's you, but if you want to change the system, we gotta be versatile and we gotta use the rules of the system to beat them. So now the conversation goes like, hey, I'm gonna quote the anti-racism director policy, or I'm gonna say I'm gonna quote the Ministry of Education policy, and I'm gonna make a point. So I think it starts kind of with relationship building, but if it's really like blatant racism, blatant discrimination, blatant hate, you gotta up your game of how you challenge that, and every situation is gonna require a different strategy. But the point is, going back to the question of why, if it's not serving the needs of the people or the specific groups it's supposed to serve, that's the perfect entry point to say, why shouldn't we change this if it's gonna change people? And the way you gotta package that is, that will actually benefit the institution. Because if you look at the school boards who are more diverse, the companies who are diverse, they're doing better. They're doing more profit. You want to make a taxpayer dollars? Did you know what homicide in Canada costs $4.8 to $5.9 million in direct and indirect costs? So creating every community safer, whether you live in it or not, actually benefits all of Canada. You might lower your taxes. So we gotta become versatile in arguing in a language that makes sense to those higher up. And sometimes you get a little bit more in your face, but I'm saying you can't just go to that as plan A, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. Thank you. All right, we're gonna wrap up at this time. Thank you so much for everyone who's online. We're gonna close this part of the session with Artivan, reading from chapter 15, excerpt from chapter 15. Their community of anti-racist and activist educators. Once he's finished reading, we'll end up having some food, some fellowship, talk, purchase books and all that good stuff. So over to you, Artivan.
And I just want to say, please feel free to reach out to any one of us, connect with us. I mean, you can just get our institutional emails if you Google us. Like, we try to give back, and I think we should all give back. Never forget our humble beginnings. All right, here's our phone goals. I would say just reflect on your own life as you maybe hear these words, because with both of you, the goal is to take you where you want to go, right? There's no one way of consuming it. We all have the potential to be great educators. You may not see yourself as an anti-racist or activist educator, but we can all be one and continue to learn, unlearn, grow, and make mistakes along the way to challenge injustice and inequities. Power, privilege, and prioritization of profit by institutions make life easy for some at the expense of oppression to others. Profit compromising equity and social justice, yet proclaiming equity, diversity, and inclusion in a superficial and performative way. It has to be more than a checklist. We got to call it out for what it is and who it excludes. Decenter the norm to ensure voices from the margins who represent community are heard. Be an advocate and activist where you can be. Plant yourself and be more. The journey will be different for everybody, giving their unique identities and lived experiences. It will be different within each postal code representing a community and its unmet needs, but above all, start somewhere and continue to grow as an individual and as a community. Colonial logic and white supremacy discourse labels some as inferior to justify harm, violence, and oppression. Refuse to believe such broad meta-narratives and stereotypical thinking about others. Hashtag disrupt deficit thinking. You do not need to be white to perpetuate white supremacy or colonial logic. We can all be complicit or choose to resist and disrupt that intentionality. By speaking up, by standing up, or doing the work as individuals or as a community, there's no one right way of doing it. We need all the efforts and the multiple strategies. We need to amplify the impact of the work by doing it in different ways and in different spaces simultaneously. There's no such thing as a safe space, so let's cultivate great spaces. We need multiple perspectives, we need uncomfortable conversations, and we need to commit to doing the work socially, culturally, emotionally, and spiritually. Self-care and self-love to heal, to hope, and commit to action. Hashtag dismantle the hierarchies. Open doors versus gatekeeping and keep the doors open. Avoid saviorism mentality. Hashtag white fragility. Ask questions and listen. Do not make assumptions about others' needs. Disrupt and dismantle the weaponization of difference. It's okay if you do not know anything about a specific culture, religion, or community. You do not need to be an expert to hold space for critical conversations and to commit to action to unlearn and challenge injustice. Do not let institutions and their typical representation of colonial tools sell you biased narratives. Who is telling the story? For what purposes? What perspectives are excluded? Who is profiting? At what and at whose expense? Ask questions and listen. How can I help? What can I contribute? Rape, violence, cultural, spiritual genocide are tools for exploitation rooted in colonial logic. Stereotypes that fuel systemic discrimination normalize inaccessibility to opportunities. Sanitization of our pain and suffering for entertainment purposes. Equity seeking, no, equity deserving. Allyship, solidarity, accomplices, co-conspirators, we need all of them because the system is made up of people. We must commit to action and be an advocate and an activist. Spark conversation. To be an educator is to be a facilitator of change. Take some time to digest, heal, and hope. Mobilize and strategize. Do it again and again and again. Return to more conversations, more advocacy, more awareness, more activism. Learn from failures of others. Work to break down systemic barriers to equity deserving identities and communities. It's not a part-time job, it's a lifetime commitment. Some live in systemic oppression on a daily basis, some can't escape it. Remember, your reality and lived experiences may drastically differ compared to what others experience. Go beyond pathologizing causes of oppression to individual behaviors and shift the conversation to the root causes associated with inaccessibility to opportunities and systemic barriers. The curriculum of life. Here's some academic words for you. Culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy. Culturally sustaining pedagogies. Pedagogies in the flesh. Pedagogies of rage and anger. Counter narratives of pain and suffering. Listen to your students. Learn from them. Who are they? What do they do outside of school hours? What are their unmet needs? Create opportunities to make mistakes and grow together as a community. Indulge in teachable moments that arise spontaneous, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Don't just talk about the importance of challenging injustice and systemic equities, model it. And along the way, share your own struggles and vulnerabilities as a form of strength. Don't be fixated with perfection, but rather how far we've come in dismantling hierarchies of power and hold on to privilege at all costs at the expense of death and suffering to others. Literally and figuratively. Commit to action. Do something about social injustice that impact your learners. Stand with them, guide them to take action. They are more than a grade. Disrupt deficit thinking. They do care about their education. Vulnerable circumstances lead to negative behaviors and shitty choices. Seek to understand instead of judging. Silence and neutrality are a stance. It is not a non-stance. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Sim, you want to say a quick thank you, and then we move into full conversation. Go ahead, Sim.
Thank you, Dr. ABC. On behalf of Boise and the entire University of Toronto community, we don't have the words to thank you. All three of them are Boise alumni. Yes, understand. Thank you for your many contributions and being leaders and role models for us. And the conversation and connections today, we hope will resonate in our school systems, in our school boards, in our community. So thank you once again, and thank you everyone for your thoughtful voices. Please enjoy the food and festivities, but please also purchase the water. Thank you so much.
Good one.
Great job. Thank you. Let's take some pictures. This year.